Miniature soldiers, big opinions. This is the Conclave Podcast.
Good evening, everyone, on this sunny Sunday where we're recording to another episode of the Conclave Podcast. Tonight, hosting, we have me, Adam, ADL Wargaming, and I am joined by Quipster. Say hi, Quipster.
Hi, Quipster.
There we go.
Nice.
And I have the Sandman, of course.
Hi, Sandman.
There we go. We're just stealing jokes from Winter's SEO. It's an ongoing theme. But more importantly, tonight we are joined by a very special guest. It's Stig from Tabletop Tactics, everyone. Say hi, Stig.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for having me, first of all.
You are very welcome. You are very welcome. As I say, it's a beautiful day, and it's a beautiful day to talk about Warhammer. Although, to be honest, we talk about Warhammer any day, so, you know, who knows the difference?
I love how, as Warhammer players, we're just like, it's a beautiful day. Let's be indoors and do only indoor activities.
Well, do you know what? I will say, and here we go, first tangent of the episode, I will say, I do hope that the tradition of garden hammer, which has obviously become not merely a thing that people just do, you know, if they have the space, but now a necessity, thanks to the slow sort of lifting of lockdown. I hope that continues, because do you know what? We had our first, all three of us had our first bit of garden hammer yesterday, in fact, with some friends of ours, in a socially distanced way within the confines of the rules of sort of 6 people outdoors, and it was glorious. It was absolutely glorious, and it was great to roll dice again. I will say that.
Honestly, it was amazing. The thing is, though, more than anything else, it was nice to be like around people. Like, do you know what I mean? Like just in the vicinity of other people,
yeah.
You know? Yeah, literally. And like, I swear to God, though, the funniest thing was it was kind of cold, but like there was no wind, and it was very sunny. And so like throughout the day, I kept on like looking over at Adam and just being like, Adam's a little bit more pink than the last time I saw him, and it gradually increased throughout the day because it was so sunny.
So, I came home to my other half, and she was like, "Oh, you've got sunburn," and I was like, "I know, and I'm okay with that." But no, don't do that, kids. Wear sunscreen. I forgot.
Totally worth it.
Although so unfortunately, where Quipster was playing was sort of in shadow underneath the building was where we were playing. So he came into the sun like a lizard to stand there for a couple of minutes, like warming himself like a cormorant on the Thames. It was majestic.
No, honestly, seriously, like because like it was in shadow, and so I was freezing. Like all these other guys were in the sun in t-shirts.
You were in a big jacket
and
as
well. I was wearing my big jacket, but I didn't have the arms through, so I was wearing it like a cape. And so, like, there were occasions when Charles, who runs our like little club at Battlefield Bermondsey, he's doing his movement phase or his deployment. I was just like, I have to go and stand in the sun for a second, and that just happened to be next to Adam's table, and I just stand there and bask for a second, just like, I need the vitamin D.
You know, I mean, picture the scene, right? As sort of myself and my opponent are working out what's going on, and I turn my head, and all I see is this kind of, you know, spread cloak of Quipster appearing like a sort of discount puffer jacket Batman, you know, to be glorious in the sun. It was the first time it was actually quite shocking, but after that it was just beautiful.
It's the fact that you still kept it as a cape, knowing somehow that it could be warmer if I wore it as a jacket. However, it's a cape, so I'm keeping it that way.
Yeah, because capes are cool. Yeah. Honestly, I don't care what the Incredibles have to say. Capes are the way forward. That's all I'm saying.
Well, you were running your Imperial Fists. You were running your Imperial Fists, and you did have Tor Garadon. So I sort of feel like you were trying to channel Tor Garadon a little bit, you know, with his
that
big
massive
cloak.
Fist you had on was a bit ridiculous.
Channel my inner siege captain.
Yeah.
$5.99 Toys R Us Hulk hand, just waving it around.
Quipster, I don't care how many times you say it. It doesn't triple your strength. It doesn't it.
Just get really angry and flip the table.
Yeah, have you managed to do any garden hammer at all at Stig? Have you managed to sort of get some games in these desperate times that we are in?
Not at the moment. A good friend of mine has literally rebuilt a table, but they're a long distance away from us, so you know the chances of garden hammer is probably out of the question for a little while. You know, it may sound like the cheesiest thing to say, but I'm also I love the fact that my next game will be back in the studio, and that's really exciting for me. So like that's also a really big deal. So and hopefully, if the UK aren't idiots, then we'll edge closer towards that. So
Yes.
play nice,
Yeah.
everybody. Follow the rules.
Plus, if you play Garden Hammer, you're gonna have to keep stepping over bone as he's a plant. So that's gonna be an absolute nightmare.
You have to be careful where you put your feet, otherwise, bad things happen.
Nice. And yeah, I think getting back to it must be weird, right? When you're gonna go back there and sort of just get a game in, and obviously Lawrence and Sanger and Bone and Chef have been knocking out content. You're gonna have to stride in there and school them in the ways of the AdMech, surely.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but it's a funny one because it's so weird because like everybody, you're working remotely, as it were, so you're still involved in everything, despite the fact that not being able to be there. So it's a very bizarre situation where I know everything and know nothing about what's changed in the background. So there's lots of stuff that I'll be back having to relearn certain things and what have you. But it'll be great fun. So.
Did you, just as a bit of behind the scenes for our listeners, did you receive an email or even just a voice message from Lawrence with a picture of the Drakari Codex and him just laughing his head off by any chance?
Not quite. Because of my restrictions a little bit because of how often I'm there normally when the world isn't so weird. I don't get involved in the playtesting side of things, but I knew that the guys were super excited about that book. Shall I say that? That's probably fair to say. They were looking forward to, just from because Chef is probably the most his want for balance across the game is the biggest thing. He wants the game to be as balanced as it possibly can, whilst also being appropriate for the lore of each army. If you see what I mean? Because everyone thinks of Chef as a rules guy, and he is. But he's also a lore guy. Like he knows his lore like nobody's business across so many armies. I don't quite understand how he absorbs so much. So it's one of those things that that book is just such a great sign, hopefully for all of us, of what's coming in terms of the writing in general. Like it's such a thematic book. It's got such balance within itself. There's bits and pieces that obviously maybe some suggestions were made. Yeah, maybe some suggestions were made as to that might be a little bit strong, and they've still made it into the book. But that's kind of how it works sometimes.
Yeah. Well, the book gets played more in like the first week, even in lockdown, more in the first week than all the play testing. Right? That's actually interesting. You say you weren't involved in the play testing purely from the point of view of, if my friends were playtesters and I knew they were playtesters, I would be the most annoying person. Anybody who knows me, if you're ever a playtester, don't tell me, because I would just piss you off. Like, did you find that? Were you like, what's going on with AdMech? What are they doing with Custodes? Like, or just 9th edition?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a weird one. I suppose the great thing for me is that I get to be like everybody else. That it's Christmas morning. And
Nice.
I really,
Cool.
I think that's really important because everything we do it because we love it, right? Like we're in a fortunate position where including yourselves, we're creating content for others, and that's really we get to do that. But we get to do that because we love what we do, and so I think don't get me wrong, at some point down the line I want to be in and out the detail of all of that sort of stuff. But for how it is now, I mean, I'm the luckiest guy in the world, so how do I, get to complain about that? Do you know what I mean? I just think of it. I'm a child on Christmas morning. I get the new book. I suppose we are still fortunate that we do get it before. Often we're fortunate that GW send them, the final versions before. So I maybe get to see it a little bit early, but even so, like that's. That's all dependent on what's going on and when the world is less broken, right? So for me, I just like to hold on to the fact that it's just great fun. It's this every one of us gets that new book in our hands and rips it open and goes to the thing that we're most excited about first, and I still get to have that. So it doesn't take away from that. So that's my positive spin on it, anyway.
I like it. It's a good. I mean, I will say, I think one thing along the lines of what you said, that Chef talks about, one thing we've been very excited by is the fact that the Drakari Codex is a great signaler for what other, Xenos codexes are going to look like. I mean, for me, I have many armies, but Tyranids are one of the ones I'm working on this year, and I'm building them up. And if that's any indication of what they're doing, I mean, it's also Craftworlds. We mentioned our friend Charles earlier. He is a massive Craftworld fan. I mean, he's got God knows how many of them. He loves the lore, loves the Eldar, and if they do a new codex that's anything along the lines of the Drakari, it's going to be so good. It's going to be good for the game overall, as you say, and as Chef sort of talks about a lot. But yeah, just those armies getting a glow up, getting a bit of glam on. It's going to be good. It's going to be tasty.
Yeah, I think it's exciting just to hear about all this new stuff coming. Every book, so far, it's there's some great stuff in all of them. So I think it's really exciting to see. We feel like we're in a good space for a game perspective. Things are going in the right direction. But yeah, definitely. I love our Myrmidon army. So I'm similar. I can't wait for a Tyranids Codex update. That'd be brilliant. They feel like they need some love, right? So
yes, yeah.
So yeah, that'll be exciting when that does happen.
Definitely. So I think then on that note, since we're talking about your enthusiasm for armies and your positivity about this game, for those who do not know, Stig, who are you? How did you get into this hobby? How long have you been playing? And how did you get involved with Lawrence and Tabletop Tactics and all those guys down there?
So, forgive me for those that have heard this too many times. My name is Stig. I'm fortunate enough to be one of the content producers for Tabletop Tactics. I'm the most part-time out of everybody. Everybody else is full-time, so I'm the spare part, which is appropriate for the AdMech. I got into the hobby, I suppose, like many of us, I played a little bit as a kid, which I'm very old, so that was 2nd edition. So I played a little bit of 2nd edition, didn't really have any money, so couldn't really afford much, and it was all quite difficult. My first army was Orcs, cool. But I say army because it was about 4 units or something because I had no money. And then Necromunda came out, so that was very exciting because that was I could buy 10 guys and I could actually have a force, so that was cool. Played a little bit of Necromunda and then stopped hanging out with those folks that I played with at that time. Other things happened, life got exciting in different ways, and had a short break for 25 years, and then was chatting at work with 2 of my friends, a certain Mr. Lawrence and a certain Mr. Joe, and we were chatting about this thing called Warhammer that Joe was just getting back into, and I was like, oh, I remember that. I then wandered off and did something else and what have you, and then a few weeks later, or I don't even know, however long later, there was, oh yeah, I did this thing on YouTube. Oh right, cool, that sounds cool. And then started watching a few of the shows, and thought, went from casual, oh, I remember that, to this is really cool. This looks really fun, and just more chatting away. And I remember I was kind of, it was coming in the process of planning my wife and I's wedding, and we were kind of in the lead up to that, and I was pretty stressed. If anyone's ever planned a wedding out there, how stressful it is for everybody involved, and my wife was doing the hard work, but I was still pretty stressed. Chatting about this with, it was Joe, it was Beard, actually, said, oh, I find really, painting really like a stress reliever. It's a really great thing from kind of helps me decompress and what have you, and I was kind of missing some of that, some form of kind of creativity, and so what seemed like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, maybe I'll pick up a few models and start painting. But I tend to do things kind of whole hog, so I thought, well, if I'm going to do some painting, I should probably work out which army I should go for, and maybe that's an army I might want to play. And as the only people that I know play are, Lawrence and Joe, then I probably have to figure this out a bit properly, because that means being able to do it on YouTube. And fast forward, and my first ever game of 40k was on YouTube. So it was a game against Sanger. Sanger had picked the game up, a few months earlier, what have you, and it was Admech against Blood Angels on YouTube. Probably still on, it's still on the app on demand somewhere. Well, actually, it was a YouTube game. It was a Freeview game. That was my first actual full game of 40k ever. It was just as 8th started, and ever been playing ever since.
So if you had joined, if you had started playing a couple months earlier, you would now be chained in the basement, and Sanger would be on it. That's crazy. So what's so interesting to me about that is because, and it is a weird one, but you essentially went 0 to 100 in terms of, I don't really have any other way of saying it, but kind of like fame in Warhammer, by which I mean like when you go to Bad Moon Cafe or you go to a tournament, there must be a lot of people, I assume, that come up to you. Yeah. So that must have been really odd.
So weird.
Yeah. It's a very, very odd thing. It's a very, very odd thing. And I think I don't know how to say it. I mean, I was probably a bit of an idiot, frankly, to think that this was a great idea to get into a new hobby that I'd never, and I'll do it in front of thousands of people. That's a great idea. Who all like to use their keyboards to tell me how I am on everything. But yeah, and it was honestly it was great. But yeah, it's a very bizarre thing to have anything. Chris will be the same, I'm sure. Like anytime you go, if you get some form of recognition, it's a very strange thing because I'm a normal person just like everybody else, and then so why does this person know who I am? But it's incredibly flattering. It's incredibly humbling. I suppose the other thing about it is as we've grown and it's got bigger, it's also been very humbling because it's kind of allowed us to see the impact we can have in a really positive way on people's lives, and I think for me that's even more something because we're just a group of mates hanging out and having fun. Like, yes, there's everything else that's to it, but if we can then do that and it has that positive impact on someone's life, then that's just incredible. Like, that's just mind-blowing. But then why wouldn't we do that? Like, why wouldn't we do that to the best of our ability to try and help people? And if someone gets some enjoyment from it, some respite from whatever they've got going on, then it's just incredible.
I mean, awesome. I'm not gonna lie. I know exactly what you mean. Being recognised as weird. This has only ever happened to me once. I got recognised in the street. I was like, "Wow! I can't believe that happened. This is really cool." But there's the other part of me that's just like, oh no, I got recognized in the street. That could be dangerous. Like, in the future.
Yeah, it's a very weird thing. Obviously, if you go to a Bad Moon or a Dark Sphere or you go to a tournament or somewhere, that's obvious. But when it's in the real world, that's a very, very strange thing, and it can also be a bit weird for those around you as well. My wife's
what
kind
do you
of
do
had
as a job? Yeah. Random nerds keep stopping you in the street. Why does this happen?
I mean, where is, if you don't me ask, because I will own up now, and I'm saying I am one of those people who has seen you at Bad Moon and was like, I really like your Mechanicus army, which I do, in all fairness. But what I was going to say is, where is like the most random? Like, have you just been like gone to like Greg's or something, and then someone's just like, oh yes, I also love Custodians. I'd like a sausage roll, please. It's just bizarre.
Well, I tell you what, the absolute weirdest one was was in the lobby. This is a thing now that obviously can't exist, but in the lobby waiting for Hamilton to start. So I was at the theatre. Just literally,
was it Lin-Manuel Miranda?
Guy comes up to me. I was with my wife and a couple of friends, and some guy walks up and just says about Admech, funnily enough. Yeah, and then disappears off like as quick as a complete like double take on it, and then it was gone. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's just happened. That's a bit weird.
That's the best place.
That's so
brilliant.
Yeah, but
I'll tell you.
Go on.
I was just gonna say, like, I have done that exact same thing, but I did it to Bone. Like these guys will tell you, like, at this point, I happen to know or be quite good friends with, like, a lot of guys in the Warhammer YouTube space, and I am not cool about this fact whatsoever. And even before that, like, I met Bone, I think it was near the beginning of 2018, and it was the most fucking random place you've ever seen. It was at the anti-Brexit demonstration. And it was a sea of 20,000 people. I've told this story on the podcast before. It was a sea of 20,000 people, and the crowd kind of parted. I was like, holy shit, that's Bone from Tabletop Tactics. What? Made a beeline straight for him. And I was like, oh my god, I love you. And he was with someone, and like after I chatted some nonsense for a second. I did turn and look at her, and I was just like, this must happen to him like quite a lot. And she just looked at me like deadpan, like, yes it does. And I was like, yeah, okay, fair enough.
But as you say, like, it's unbelievably humbling, like when something like that happens, because hopefully that's come from the fact that you've made a connection with someone, and they've liked what you do in some way, shape, or form, and that's just amazing.
I wish I'd been there for that. It's just like, guys, we're really concerned about the implications of leaving the single market in the customs union. Shut up, we're talking about orcs.
I mean, also, let's face it,
was
Bone
me.
is quite recognisable. That's just like, he just is that,
But
He's
to
a
be
big
fair,
character.
though, it was even funnier because like I saw him in the crowd and I talked to him for like a good 5 minutes, and then I turned to my left and Fatboy Slim had been standing next to me the whole time.
That's a really
like,
horrible
what?
name for Lawrence, mate. That's...
So basically, you're like a sort of magnet for celebrities. We just follow you around, and they will appear.
Apparently.
I love the fact that somehow Fatboy Slim, Norman Cook, and Ben, my mate Ben, are in the same... That's just weird.
He's famous to me.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, the Hamilton musical's definitely got to take it. I would love to have seen the comment. Like afterwards, they're like, you can come and meet a member of the cast. They're like, guys, like, no, I want to talk to Stig more about Admech. just far more interesting than Hamilton. So I think on that then, obviously you mentioned your first sort of army, inverted commas, as you say, it was what we all put together when we are younger, and again I will say all of us three certainly were in the same boat, right? We had our early armies. I think we the common thing between all three of us, and I will ask you this as well, did you ever get into the Battle for Middle Earth magazine, or was that late after your time? I don't know.
I'm so old that was way past my time. I was probably being thrown out of pubs at that point. Yes.
Nice, yeah. It's like a weird common thing, like among all of us when we got chatting about it. We all, as again, all had that similar story about starting an army when we were kids, like getting into it. I mean, again, starting an army, right? Just basically going, oh, this looks cool. I'm gonna buy this one, and then
I
the
can
Battle
just
for Middle
about
Earth
afford
magazine.
this one, and that's
Yeah.
what I'm gonna get.
Yeah.
Especially back then when it was like there was a lot more. I mean, I've still got like metal. Like the metal stuff knocking around in like so back then as well, it was all that like lead, which is now sadly gone to Finecast, but we won't criticise that too much. But yeah, then we all had the Battle for Middle Earth magazine that we all ended up getting, and because we all are massive nerds, like everyone who does this hobby and loves Lord of the Rings. But I was going to say, you're obviously known primarily now for the Custodes and the Admech. I mean, if I may ask you to choose, which is your favourite of the armies, or is it something completely different?
And why is it Custodes?
Well, I'm sorry to say it, but it is the Admech.
What? You were my favourite.
I know. Look,
You were the chosen one.
I
made me
do
really happy.
love my Custodes. I love my Custodes, and the Christopher Wright books, I'm sure they've been spoken about, like those, that for me those are the representations of Custodes as far as I'm concerned. There's a fair amount of lore out there that just doesn't quite fit for me, my picture of what they are. It fits for other people, and that's fine, but like the Christopher Wright stuff, that's there's a kind of there's almost that situation where there's more connection to the humanity of them in some way, and yet they're further apart from humanity than they could possibly be. So it's this weird sort of duality. But there's that and the especially kind of the fact that there's more interest in the humanities, for want of a better phrase. There's more interest in everything and understanding more and actually understanding. That's the element of Custodians I love. But on the flip of that, one of the things I love about the AdMech is the complete stupidity of it. Like the fact that it's a technological based army that have no idea how any of the technology works, and yet think that for the majority, if they just rub oils into it and pray better, that it'll work better. I mean, that's just brilliant. I love the kind of complete stupidity of it. It's something very, very 40k and unique to 40k. I think that's one of the things from an IP perspective that is absolutely unique. Is the AdMech, and I think that's one of the reasons why I am so fond of them, because they are so kind of just such a weird mixture of different things. And as a fan of old mechanical things in real life, I love that element as well. So I think I understand some of that. And who hasn't prayed to their computer to turn back on again at some point when it's not doing what they're supposed to?
I mean, in a previous life, while a student, I was lucky enough to work at a shop of a large computer company, which shall go unnamed. And my other half also worked there, and she was one of the genii, one of the geniuses, which rather gives it away. And I did rather enjoy the idea that when they took the computer out the back, actually it was just rubbing unguents into it and sort of holy oils and such, and then it sort of worked. Well, it's not, to be clear to anyone listening, but it would have been good if it was. Sues you. yeah, just in case.
Tim Cook listens.
Yeah.
Did this company rhyme with Schmapple?
Yeah, possibly, yes, but maybe not. But yes, that was an interesting. So yeah, the tech priests. I like to think of the genii as sort of the proto tech priests in some way, as it were. That we will eventually get. But that's really cool. But if we can focus on even though they are not the number one in your mechanical heart, the Custodes for a second, because I have to do this, and listeners will know that Quipster is the captain general. I mean, if Trajan Valoris sneezes, he's there putting his uniform on, going, "Don't worry, I'll cover for you for a bit. It's fine." We have to talk about the Custodes, and obviously you have built up a pretty sizable Custodes force based on both Instagram and Tabletop Tactics that I've seen you play. I mean, obviously you said about the lore and the Chris Rake books that you love, but on the tabletop, what is it you really enjoy about the Custodes, and sort of where do you see them both now and where they're going, I guess, in the over the next sort of iterations of Ninth and the new codexes?
Yeah, it's cool. I think when I got into Custodes, when I first took them on, one of the things that really interested from a game perspective, just more specifically, was how important every single thing you do is with that army. Because of it being super elite, your pile-in can make or break your turn. How you particularly in 8th, but like how you make the most of every single movement you've got, how you make the most of every possible way to every decision you make is really important. So from as I was still learning the game, and one of the things that when you're learning the game and you're doing it in a public space, one of the things from what we do is we almost never play the same list twice. And of course, what's the first piece of advice you give to everyone playing? Play the same list, learn it, know what your army does, and of course we take that away from ourselves. So to create entertainment. So from a kind of play perspective, it really helped me kind of focus on the details of what I was having to do and where that can make a difference. And also, they're not as killy, particularly in 8th, they're not as killy as they probably should be from the lore perspective.
I'm so glad someone else said it. Honestly,
they're just not. They're not a killer army, really. There are things that will do absolute devastation against the right opponent, and there are times that you're just going to, and we're not killed anything again. But more importantly, I'm existing in this space, and you're not going to take me away from it in any way, shape, or form. So it's such a different army to the Abmech, which everything is squishy, everything's made of paper. So that's a really interesting. It was always a really interesting thing for me as I got into them and started playing them, and I think that's probably an interesting thing in terms of what I might like them to do is probably have meet the law a little bit more, if that makes sense. There, because there are, one of the things I love about, in the writing, they're often talking about, putting only the right amount of force in. So they'll be very specific where they're going against a lesser foe. They're a bunch of cultists. They're not going to put their ore in. They're basically getting their pinky finger out and knocking them over because that's all they need to do. They're efficient. They're doing what they need to do. And then the time when they're coming up against some Chaos Lord, they're actually going to do something because they can. And I think I love the idea of maybe they have something like that they can be a bit more. That they can kind of have that flexibility because, like I say, they're not a very killy army largely. There are things that do great damage, and there's times that I'm going to exist here, and that's what I'm going to do, and you're going to do everything you can, fire your entire army at my one Telemon that's standing here, and it's not going to take a single wound. That's
I've done that.
Happens. Yeah. So they're an interesting one in that way.
I mean, just from my perspective as well, one of the things I want to see from Custodes is more nitty gritty of the lore. And what I mean by that is, if you look at Space Marines, best example of this, there is a lot of lore regarding the structure of companies, the structure of individual squads, markings, heroes, who are the captains, all this kind of stuff. There's lots of named characters. And because Custodes are so new, I think we're missing a lot of that. One of the big things that a lot of people comment on being named characters, in that we have two technically with Valerian and Tracer. Yeah.
I mean, Valerian, I love the model. I've got it. Yeah. But
it's rubbish though.
He's not really. He's not really anything. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'd love to see Valerian be more of a thing, but also, playing Shadow Keepers, obviously I want the Lock Warden to be the new named character, but for you, Stig, who do you want to have be the next Custodes named character?
That's where
Constantine Valda.
It's possible. It's possible.
He is back. He is back in theory.
If anybody watches Valrak.
Yeah, I was going to say, anybody who's seen a certain chapter master Valrak will be aware of this, but we won't dwell on it.
We'll see where that actually lands. But that would be incredible. That would be
it would be the greatest thing.
Unbelievably incredible. However, I'd also love to see, what does that conversation look like with Trajan? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's are you in charge now, or how does this work?
To be fair, I think Trajan would just be like, you know what, you're Constantine Valdor, you can just take it from here, it's fine.
But he'll say that, but then he'll have to go to a counselling session, and he'll walk in, and there'll just be two seats, and there'll be the counsellor there, and the other seat will have Marnius Calgar in it, and he'll stand up and go, "Hi, my name's Marnius, and I was also replaced by someone better than me."
They did. They have. I do think they have. I honestly made a mistake. Well, I think they have slipped up with Trajan quite a lot because. Crypto, I can't remember who it was you and I were talking to. This was a little while ago. We were talking to some people, and then you were saying and you made the point Trajan should be way better than any Space Marine captain by quite some margin. And people genuinely, this really shocked the people we were talking to. They genuinely didn't know. They were like, why would he be way better? Why would he be better? And it's he's I'm a Space Marine player, but Custodies are like they bridge the gap to Primarchs in like power level. So people and like I have a big gripe with Commander Farsight because it's D3 damage, but Trajan being D3 damage,
D3 damage
hurts me. Hurts my soul.
So frustrating. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's the thing. He is, again, lore-wise, he's the one that can go toe to toe with a Primarch virtually. That's the idea of him. He should be an absolute, but he should also have that ability to be able to step into that when he needs to and be able to. So I would love one of the things from. I'm going to go massive side tangent here, but one of the things I love about AOS is some of those kind of some of those larger named models where you get like kind of two versions, so you almost get like and whilst he doesn't need a separate model, but almost I wonder if there's somewhere like that where you could, from a rules mechanic perspective, I've loved maybe not just Trajan, but maybe thinking outside for other characters where there's the kind of stoic side, which is so almost as if this is what they do at some points, but then if you choose to move to this, then you'll lose out on other things. But you've maybe now got him, now I'm going to go and just be a beat stick, but I can only do that for one turn or whatever it might be, that you've got something that allows them to be able to go, he can be a weapon, but we're not going to make him 400 points because he's still one thing. So maybe there'd be some interesting things. How you balance it, hey, that's not for me to have to worry about. But like,
I don't care. Make him unbalanced. I'm cool with it.
Yeah, the reality is that you're right. He should be able to be an absolute beat stick and just be out there. But you've got to give some balance, and there's maybe some take somewhere along the line.
See, I almost like on your point, Quipster, talking about the name characters thing, and I do agree. Like, I mean, I've got, again, among many armies, but I've got a small Custodes force, and it would be nice for them to have more named characters. But one thing that I really like about the lore, and they talk about this, I think, more in the Horus Heresy books than they do in the like the Watchers of the Throne and the sort of more recent lore that they've done on them. But the idea of the Custodes, the different, like the big differentiation. Whenever you read any of the Horus Heresy books, and they're talking about when the Marines are watching the Custodes fight. And there's a lot of this in like the Word Bearers book, where they
First
turn
Heretic,
traitor, basically. First Heretic, yeah, exactly. When they talk about watching the Custodes fight, and they say the one big difference with them is that they actually almost don't fight as a cohesive unit in the way that Space Marines do. Space Marines fight kind of almost like the Roman army, right? Like as a unit. They only ever function as a unit. As individuals, obviously they're still very powerful, but they're actually not very good as individuals. Their true strength lies in being a unit. The Custodes, while they work together, they are an army of individuals. So maybe if there was some way that you could almost... So I'm thinking here of along the lines of, you pay for like the little... and obviously I know Custodes have the the additional traits. You can make Captain Commander and things like that, which are all sort of CP based in that sort of very 8th edition way. Hopefully that'll move over to sort of small points increases, much like they have for Space Marines and Chief Apothecaries and chapter champions and things like that. But if you could do that across the whole army, and again kind of reflect that, like you were saying, Stig, like you could have your regular Custodes and then you pay some points and then you make one or two of them these particular veterans of particular types of campaign or something. That would be cool, because you could then, although they're not a named character in the sense of they're not like official, you could name them yourself, and you could reflect that Custodes lore about they get their names through their deeds and through your own battles. I mean, I certainly hope they build that into the Crusade system for Custodes, but it'd be really cool to see that in the regular rule set as well. And I know Quipster, for example, I know you have your oh so famous spreadsheet that we talk about, where you sort of record the deeds of the Custodes in an incredibly law compliant way. It's brilliant, right? But if you were almost encouraged, I mean, don't get me wrong, listeners, I'm not going to force you all to start up an Excel like this guy, but
I will
to have
do
some
it.
way of all of you must have an Excel with formulae and everything. No, but if you had some way of doing that and boosting your individual characters and having this army of characters, this army of heroes, I feel like that would be so cool, and it'd be quite unique in 40k as well. Because you've got your
the
hordes
lions to the nth degree.
Exactly,
100%.
absolutely, yeah. I just think that'd be so cool.
This is the thing. The Space Wolves in 8th edition, I don't know if they still have it, had a strat where if there was one model left in a unit, you could pay a CP and it would become a character.
Yeah, I think they still got
and
that.
it would,
Lone Wolf,
Lone Wolf,
like, why isn't that a Custodes thing? That's the most characterful Custodes thing ever.
I feel like it actually,
I was going to say, the interesting thing is there's also the thing about when, from a lore perspective, when a Custodes recognises that they've just lost that fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second, they effectively give up their post and go and become a spy. Effectively, they lose their armour and they disappear off into to be part of the network and just to be able to disappear, because despite being 8 foot tall, they were able to hide in incredible ways. And I'd love that to be a thing. Wouldn't it be incredible for like almost Custodes level assassin that just appears from the shadows for a turn, and gets to appear and do their thing, and that sort of thing. So whilst he's not a named character to your original question that I never answered, then that would be something I would love to see, because that kind of is that same thing. You could be, that is the character that you perhaps create yourself, that you can choose a model to be that, and they maybe they arrive on turn 2 in the reinforcement kind of way, or whatever it might be, but they gain almost like the with knights and Freeblade knights, where you can gain a couple of positives, but maybe you have a negative, to reflect the fact that character is older and has moved away from their post because they're doing so. Maybe they gain a couple of extra attacks to reflect the fact that they were very, very much a veteran, but they're not quite as strong as they were, or not quite as tough as they were, or whatever it might be. They can do something in that way, and again, it's that thing that you can live the deeds, you can build that into your army's lore as it goes on.
Okay, hear me out on this one. So we take that concept, they're like veteran Custodes or something, right? And they have an ability which can turn off an action, right? So if an enemy unit is doing an action, they turn it off. How do you justify that? Well, they're the eyes of the Emperor. They know what the enemy army is doing in advance, right? So you can bring them in on the board, you can deep strike them, and you can turn off an enemy action.
Personally, I think we should expand on that, and it should just be a strat, which is just 1 CP, and you win.
You've always been about that game balance, eh, Quipster?
It could be used from what, like null balances, so like turn 2 onwards, something like that.
Yeah, you got to give them a chance.
Only if you have models on the board turn 2.
Yeah,
of course.
But do you think, Stig, that they're going to move towards and this is something we certainly we talked about as a group before, around having it as almost a Talons of the Emperor codex, and giving the Sisters of Silence, because I feel like they need some love, like they are part of that Talons of the Emperor, and they were there for a while, and then apart from the Valerian Alea model, they've sort of fallen out of favour with GW, it seems.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I'm a massive fan of kind of Inquisitors and all that side of things as well. And
Inquisitor Heidegger.
Yeah, exactly. And so I kind of I don't know where the best place for them is. Is it something that's in the kind of as you say, Talons style, where it goes back with the Custodes, and that's in theory they're quite a nice yin and yang to work together. But to a certain degree, does it also give the Custodes some relatively cheap bodies to stand on things, which can, again, that maybe just ends up, well, are we just doing soup but with a different name? And that I suppose that's the worry, isn't it? Like they're not that great at the moment. I still love the models; they're great models. There's some interesting plays with them. They've got some really good strats. If you play them right, alongside a Custodes army, they can work really, really well. But you have to, be careful with it. So I guess, part of me would love to see them a lot more involved.
I think if you combine these two ideas, because I'm a huge fan of the Unleash the Lions, as you say. I think we've seen a little bit of this. I don't think it's I honestly don't think it's that silly. I think you need to change. You give Custodes their own lookout server rule addendum where one model can screen or however you want to do it. And at that point, then Sisters of Silence aren't this incredibly cheap unit because it's cheaper to take one Custode. A Custodian priced at like 100 points, right? Then sitting on a backfield objective, or 200 points to secure a backfield objective. It's about what everyone else pays. That makes a lot of sense. And at that point, I think the reason I think it's because you mentioned earlier, Stig, like we all wish for things and then leave it for them to balance. I feel like this is so doable because like if any army, right, you can expect to have 18 heroes. The Custodes are the perfect army. And with Sisters of Silence, I think they've missed a trick with Sisters of Silence in that they're going purely down the anti-psyker thing. Which is obviously very narrative, but the thing is about Sisters of Silence in the books is they affect everybody. You can't even see them. They make everybody uncomfortable. Like they'll make you throw up just to be in the same room as them. So I think what you do is you just give them these bonkers abilities that aren't focused on psychic, because that's the problem. Is I think from a balance point of view, how do you point them if they just like nullify demons and psychic powers, but then they don't do anything versus anything else. So I think they need to switch the Sisters of Silence focus to just being like this, like I don't know, they've got like some incredibly powerful minus to hit, negative minus to wound, like they're ridiculously tanky at that point. At that point, it's exactly as you say. The worry is them just being the cheap screen for Custodes, and that's not really what we want, is it? It's a tough one.
Yeah.
The thing I'd like to point out quickly is. Stig is for our listeners who can't see this. Stig has been talking about Talons of the Emperor with a twinkle in his eye, so I think we can say that's Illuminati confirmed. Talons of the Emperor is coming.
If only I knew. If only I knew. Yeah, I suppose
he's winking at us.
We're gonna get a video. We're gonna get a video with Lawrence in a blonde wig going, Conclave podcast, fake news. They're just fake news. They're just making it up. It's not. I don't want to get into that.
It's a funny
YouTube
one.
drama.
Well, this is the thing that here's always the interesting thing. I'm tangenting again. Sorry. Anytime that I post something on my Instagram, I then will get a bunch of people go. So is this? Like it's like crazy. Like how every and some of the leaps. I mean, there's some things. But it's. I posted not that long ago. I posted some Admech breaches, and of course, what happens next? Like 2 weeks later, the Armies of Renown book comes out, and of course, I genuinely hadn't read that book. I had no idea what it was whatsoever. I just had these 3 boxes of breaches that had been sitting around for a while and thought, I'll build these. That sounds like fun. And then, of course, everybody thinks it's the link to this. So, it's always interesting as to, what goes where and when people, read into whatever we post or just chat about.
So, question then: how many boxes of Sisters of Silence have you got just lying around?
I currently don't have any. Yeah, I currently don't have any. However, I would love some. They have been in my Element Games basket many times. I've not just and had to prioritize other things. So it's one of those that I really like the models. I really do.
I must confess. Last probably August or October or whatever, it was in it was a video that you guys had made, not a battle report, just like a behind the scenes video that Lawrence had done, and he was and I think Lawrence and Bone, and they were talking about what Sanger was working on. And then he was so next on the list is actually Sanger's doing a Dark Angels army. And so I went to my mates, their Dark Angels is going to be really good. And then I think John, I was like, fucking hell.
And I can honestly say that the models for that Dark Angels army have been sat in the office for so long. Some of those moved from London. Wow. Honestly,
wow.
So that we have to plan out projects a long time in advance generally. So there were always things that there are, and I'm not going to say what, so don't ask that question. But there are many kits that we've had since the days in London that have not even come close to being in armies yet. That that we've had to get at various points, or they've been the plan to be next to go and then they didn't, for various things. So there's always stuff that's going on. I've got lots of stuff that's sitting around that is not been on an Instagram feed or a report and won't be probably for quite a long time yet. So it's one of those things. You end up, things get moved around, shall we say.
It's quite fun though. There is that whole like cottage industry that exists solely on taking what you guys do, what like Titans do, what all the other big YouTube channels do, and then just be like, well, this indicates that this thing is happening, and it's like it must be fun just to see it sometimes. You're just like, no, we just had that. We had that in a box for the last 3 years, so thought we'd build it.
Yeah, it's literally, and I'm waiting on it. So I've got. One thing I will say, I've got a bunch of knights sitting around like that. Most 40k hobbyists probably got a bunch of knights.
Knight meta confirmed.
So it's like that's the interesting one that's going to happen, right? I'm going to put these together, and then instantly that's where everyone's going to say that's what's next. That's what's going to be brilliant. But it's like I want to paint a knight because it's a cool thing, So
You know what? We are at the Conclave, and we came up with this a couple of podcasts ago. We are building a knight army. So listeners, read into that what you will. There's a conspiracy between the content creators. We're all going knights now.
We're all going knights.
I think I'm the only one from the Conclave that hasn't bought that knight yet.
Yeah, you need to sort that out, mate, because they're going to be big for reasons I can't disclose. No, I was going to say. I mean, I think that's a good point to move on, talking about the kind of the building of stuff to your AdMech army. You said, your sort of your big love, if not your first love, with the orcs. And one thing I was going to say I love about your AdMech army, just to kick off with, is you've done a lot of conversion stuff. There's a lot of kind of AOS. The death, the Nighthorn. Yeah, I was gonna. Do you know what? That's good, Ed. You said that because I was going to call them the Death Ghosts because I forgot what they were called. So yes, the Nighthorns.
That's a way better name.
That was already trademarked.
Yeah, Death Ghosts was my band in uni. No, so we, the Nighthaunt models that you've kind of turned into these proper creepy looking tech priests and really leaning into that grim dark AdMech feel. It's so cool. What sort of was your inspiration behind that? Was it just the lore, or just you thought, I'm going to make this thing look absolutely mad?
Probably both, if I'm honest. I think one of the things I love about the Skitarii, particularly within the AdMech, is how interchangeable so much of their stuff is. It was designed that way. It was. I know it was. It's been said about that's not me breaking someone's confidence. It's just they've talked about it various things, that it was designed to be, that's the same neck joint, that's the same arm joint, like those kind of things, and they're they take some work because to get the two, they are pairs of arms generally, because of where a hand joins a rifle and what have you, but even that's not too much work on it really, once you've kind of got a little bit of practice with it. But I love the fact that you can do that, and then at the same time, like many others, I like to see other models and think that's really, really cool. Can I steal it and make it fit into my army somehow? And I think that tech priest that you kind of talk about was probably that was probably the first, like, quote unquote major kit bash that I'd done, which was just exactly that, reading stuff and hearing about the different differences and really no tech priest being the same, and I'd already built two of the same ones with the two options that were available. I was like, I don't want that anymore. I want to build one that's mine, and so that was just that. Coming up with that, thinking that those models, it was one of the Wraith. Wraith, I think they're called Wraiths of some description. It's one of the larger, in the Nighthaunt. I almost said Death, whatever it was.
The campaign to rename them the Death Ghosts starts here.
Death Ghosts. One of those.
Sounds like a mid-90s
ones.
metal band.
Yeah, exactly. Really, really 90s. And I'm just like, this model's so cool, but look at all of this negative space. What if all of that was cables? And it kind of went from there. So I just like the idea that this thing, it has gone so far away from its humanity that it's basically just floating, ghost-like, in that way, and but maybe there is some kind of so then of course my brain goes, well, how could it actually do that? Oh, right, so I need something that's some kind of like force generator, something use. So I find a piece that's off an electro priest, one of the snail electro priests, Corpsicari to use their proper name. They're snail electro priests, and it was like, oh, if I turn this round and if I chip here and that looks like it could be some kind of force generator. Right, that goes in there, and where do we go from there? And just letting it go from there. And I think that's, I've then always tried with everything I do. I'll probably try, when I get a new kit, I probably try and put the first one together as it's supposed to be. And then after that, I'll go, well, where else can I go? What, especially because, we often end up with situations where you have a lot of something because you want our armies tend to be much larger than most normal and proper and real hobbyists, because we're idiots and because we want we need to show that variety, right? So that means I'm just not gonna build the same box twice, because that doesn't interest me. I'd much rather then go, all right, so what else do I do with it, and where can it go, and the kit bashes probably that I'm the most happy with is where people don't realize it's a kit bash until they then realize it's a kit bash, if that makes sense. It takes a while. They don't notice it at first, or they don't realize, oh, hang on, like, you can't get that combo. How does that work? Or where's that from? That sort of stuff. That's the ones that I love the most. Having said that, I also love ones like that Tech Priest, and I've got a very nice count as cool, I would probably say, is what she is, that is completely made up of all sorts of bits. I've got that somewhere on my Instagram, I think, further enough down the line, so I'll eventually get around to painting her, but like, she is a combination of so many different pieces that I couldn't even remember where most of them are from, and that's an example of exactly that, where you start with one thing and then just go off on one, and it's great fun.
So talking of AdMech and the new model kits and getting stuff on YouTube, the AdMech just recently had like a massive increase in their range, which has been fantastic, and all the stuff that's come out has been frankly beautiful. But like, as someone who's on YouTube and a content creator, are there times where you feel a lot of pressure to just get stuff out and just be like, oh god, I'm gonna get this done because like the guys need me?
Yes, is the short answer on that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've still got a couple of the planes that I bought the day that they were available, and they've not left the box. Other than me kind of figuring out, well, how am I going to build them? How am I going to, what's the sub-assembly that I'm going to do on this? How's that going to work? And working out some color palette stuff. Like they're still in the box, and that that's something that I feel, I want people to be able to see these what these do, and I also want to do a good job on them, so that's always the difficulty. And I also I'm probably also one of the people that I like to find an unloved unit that I like and do something with it. So like, obviously now laser chickens are everywhere, but like when I started putting laser chickens together, they weren't. Everybody thought they were dumb and too expensive and not very good, and then I showed that you can get a lot of lascans hitting on 2s re-rolling 1s, and lo and behold, people realised that was actually quite good. They just hadn't seen it before somehow. But like, it's one of those things I love. Like I've always been a fan of the underdog, shall we say? So I want to make Rust Stalkers good. I want to figure out how to do that, if that's possible, because the models are so cool. So it's like, I want to do that. So I have that pressure on myself as well to go, I need to get all of this stuff going, but I also want to try this unloved thing that's been sitting in the corner for a long time. I also want to get that going as well. So it's, yeah.
So basically what you're saying is that you liked all of these things before they were cool.
It's quite an expensive army. Like, I was just thinking just now, because you play AdMech and Custodes, I think you've chosen the opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of price. Custodes have got to be the cheapest army to collect, and I would wager AdMech are the most expensive.
Unless you look at Forge World. Unless
Even with Forge World,
We don't like
pounds
to
per
talk about
points,
that.
Pounds per points. Forge World
Yeah.
isn't as bad as something like AdMech is. Like those dogs. How much those dogs do you get pound per points? It's nothing.
Yeah, and I what did
Yeah.
I bought 5 or 6 boxes at first, I think, and it was like just
Jesus.
no, no, and I own
They're fun,
12
though. They're fun.
chickens now, so
Nice.
like but GSC, that's another relatively
GSC is
expensive,
very expensive,
on
yeah.
the opposite way, because you end up buying lots and lots of kits just to buy as many of the rock swords as you can.
It's the same thing though. It's like because the I forgot the Sulphur Hounds is some of the coolest models GW have made in recent years, and same with GSC. It's like it's all the stuff that is really cool that is expensive. They know what they're doing.
Well, I think that the thing that did that for me though was with the Sulphur Hounds when they previewed them. They on their own podcast they went into a bit more detail about it, and I was looking at them thinking they don't look like that's not a horse, that isn't a horse, before we knew the name. And then on that podcast Darren Latham was talking about the fact they'd studied greyhounds and see it, and my family and I have been involved in rescue greyhounds for donkey's years, so like I suddenly realised why I needed to have these models, and I literally messaged Darren as soon as that podcast came out saying, I can't believe you did this is the most perfect thing ever. I was just I was sold at that point, and hence I knew I needed to have as many doggos in my life as possible.
Yeah. I have a rescue. The reason I for obviously listeners cannot see this, I immediately put my thumbs up and I opened the door because then I realised he was probably sleeping on our sofa. But I have a rescue greyhound, so I'm a big fan of both the rescue greyhound concept and also of the Sulphur Hounds. I think they are, as Ed says, they are one of the coolest looking models that GW have brought out in a long time.
100%.
Just while we're talking about, we mentioned Forge World there, just one question I have for you, and obviously it's been an issue that has bumped around in the kind of community, and the AdMech player community in particular, for a very long time. Obviously, because of their role in the Horus Heresy, there is this big Forge World range for the AdMech of all the kind of Cybernetica robots and things like that, which, in my opinion, I think they look really, really cool. And as I understand it, there was at the very least, a proposal or something GW talks about to bring a book out that would allow some of that to translate across into 40k, and then it just never went anywhere. Is that something you'd like to see, or would you like to see them keep on expanding, maybe even more the AdMech range as it is now in the kind of the more 40k aesthetic?
That's a great question. I think it's an interesting one. I think there's elements of that 30k range which I love. Like a lot of the automata, a lot of the robots are just brilliant, and I could absolutely see how that links and how that works, because it doesn't. That's very purposeful. Like a big thing about the AdMech is that they don't work together. They don't look like they, there's some elements, Skitarii elements, obviously translating, but you can have Da Vinci wingmen, and you can have doggos, and you can have crawlers, and you can have floaty boats, and all that stuff all works despite the fact that none of it looks the same. That's fine. And I think so some of the automata, I think that works, that makes sense, and you could easily lure that up in terms of this, discovered, Forge World that thought had, been disappeared for 10,000 years. Oh, look, it's there, and there's a whole bunch of stuff just hanging out in the warehouses. And some of that, great, love it. And yes, I would probably be spending too much money in Forge World if that happened. But I love the way the 40k aesthetic is. Because of what I've just said. I love the fact that it's eclectic. I love the fact that it doesn't all kind of work to a certain degree. It's not it's not Space Marines. That's no disrespect to Space Marines, but like if I wanted that uniformity, I would buy a Space Marine army. I would play Guard. I would, that would be, but for me, the colouring in the edges, all the kind of where it can go in all these different ways, that's one of the things that I love about my AdMech. That's one of the things that I love there, is because it's just completely unique. So that doesn't mean to say that the 30k doesn't work with that, but it is of a certain look. A lot of it is is more specific, and that makes sense from a lore perspective as well, because the Mechanicum was much more together at that point. As they've become the Adeptus Mechanicus is where there's been more separation, and Mars has the control. However, it is not as, it doesn't tell exactly what's going on. And there's probably lore folks out there that know way better than me and can point to these 4 books and these things explaining how I'm wrong, and that's fine. But like, that's my kind of take on it, and that's why there's been that more separation. Again, this hobby is what we want it to be, right? So for other people, they want the 30k rules, and that's cool.
Well, I was just going to say just a quick one. I was going to say just exactly what you were saying there in terms of like there are a whole bunch of things. Until they showed this model the other day, the new one coming out, I had never seen AdMech as this kind of Napoleonic era style, cavalry infantry lining up force. And then they released that model, and I just clicked in my brain. It's like, oh, you could make them that way, and you could it's so interesting how you could pick a aesthetic with AdMech as an AdMech army and just build that. I find that fascinating. Yeah,
exactly that. That is one of the things that's great about them, is they get to be whatever you want them to be. And that's sometimes called spam, and other times it's called thematic. But without being so flippant, you can put 10 AdMech players together, and outside of a meta that's completely going in a certain direction, you'll get 10 different lists, and that's where it's fun for me. That's where it's fun. That's why my AdMech army is quite so ranging, is because I want to play all 10 of those lists, and I want to play all 10 of those armies, because they all play differently, and that's really important to me. So yeah, I mean, we get more toys, we get more ways to do it, and that's better. I suppose I worry that a lot of the Mechanicum stuff looks quite static, and I wouldn't want us to revert to castle type armies, because for me, just from a play style perspective, I don't enjoy that very much. I do it every so often because there's a certain list that we kind of have to show off, but it's not really my favourite way of playing the game. So therefore, I it can be very powerful, but it's just not necessarily my favourite. So,
I mean, one thing I wanted to ask as well, sort of going back to like a YouTube thing, did you feel like a lot of pressure to start a second army? Because like this is one of the reasons. This is actually the only reason I have Imperial Fist, because like I think a lot of us in the hobby have like that one faction where we're like, I'm a Dark Angels player, but I also have GC Cults, or in my case, I'm a Custodes player, but I also have Imperial Fists. Are you like an AdMech player who was like, I'm on YouTube, I kind of need a second army, or was it something you were always going to do?
It was always something I was going to do. I think what's interesting is, so I, after a while of playing the AdMech, I played a few of our other studio armies. I'm in the incredibly fortunate position where I get to actually play other armies before kind of making some of these decisions. So I played, I played a game with Grey Knights. I played a game with our Tyranids, awesome. Our Myrmidon army. I played a game with our Ravenwing army. I played various different, other games. I've played a game with our orcs before, not the current orcs, the previous orcs. Not the previous orcs to that either. I was going to say. We have all of these orc armies now. I honestly have no idea how many points.
And you went from like 0 to 3 orc armies in like a year. It was incredible, and they were all like 5 to 10,000 points. It was
our current one is enormous. I say the current. I say we've got them all, but the one that we're using the majority now is it's just enormous, and there's more to come with it. So that is one of my favourite studio armies we've got. By the way, just go back to the point of kit bashing. Like there's some incredible stuff on that, and none of us did it, so we can always say how amazing it is.
I was going to say Sanger's probably going to be trapped again. Like now, I would assume he's allowed. Now the weather has improved. He's allowed out of the basement for like walks and round the garden.
He can
and stuff.
See daylight once in a while, all right? And that's enough for him.
Well, once those beast snaggers come out, he can be locked away more permanently to add those to the orc army, right?
Oh, well, that's one of the ones that is done by a separate commission painter. So that army gets added to periodically that way. So it allows Sanger to do other things. He's busy enough as it is, to be fair to him. Despite what I often say.
When those new boys come out at some point this year, whoever that studio commission painter is that you guys are using, they're going to have a job on their hands.
Well, I love the ones that we've got because there's loads of cool stuff in there that like they're within the boys that we've got, and I don't even know how many boys we've got. I think like 120 or something stupid. I mean, I no idea. But like, there's a bunch of the Blood Bowl stuff. There's some bodies off, like some more AOS stuff. Like there's loads of combos in there, and it's not just like there's a Blood Bowl miniature mixed in, painted the same way. No, it's like a full they are a full kit bash galore, and it's great. Our weird boys have got some Nighthaunt bits on them and stuff like that. So they've got their capes and they're often spewing stuff and various things. But
why do you guys love Nighthaunt so much?
I don't know. They're cool models though. We do funnily have a Nighthawk army, but that's for a different matter. But
what is your AOS army, out of curiosity? Because the guys have said that they've got AOS. I think Beard's got Skaven, Chef has a couple. Have you got one? Are you allowed to say? Is that...
So I started buying an AOS army. This is donkey's years ago. This must be 2 or so years ago. And I've completely forgotten what they're called. The ogres that are on cows. What are they called?
Something more.
Beast
something
Claw.
more tribes.
Beast Claw.
Beast Claw Raiders. Beast Claw Raiders,
Yeah.
I think.
Oh.
So
okay.
I started buying
Nice.
models for a Beast Claw army, thinking that this is really cool because I'm a big nerd for Vikings and all that sort of stuff, and I thought, well, this is a great way that I could do a Viking army that's a bit different because at that point I didn't feel like I could do a Space Wolves army because Bone Space Wolves were our only Space Wolf army at the time, and I thought, well, he's done that, so I don't really want to kind of go in that way. So I thought, well, maybe this is the way, and I started buying some kits, and then just got complete cold feet on it for some reason. I don't even know why, and ended up passing on the army to I say army, the boxes, they weren't built, to a friend. So he bought those off me, and I kind of then sat and didn't do anything for a very long time, and did the thing that I always say to everybody else, which is spend a long time looking at troops, because the troops are the thing that you're going to paint the most of and probably move the most. So if you don't think they're cool, you're probably going to struggle with any
Good
army.
advice.
Custodians are probably the
good
one
advice.
option that doesn't work with that. But
Yeah.
and so I've spent a very, very long time just looking at various bits and pieces. I have now chosen my personal AOS army. I have now purchased 2,000 points worth of kits. It's actually about 2,500 points worth of kits, but they are sitting in boxes. But I've probably given you a bunch of clues already on this with the fact that my love for Vikings, but also. It's all my 40k armies are Imperial, so these are not an Order faction. I'll leave it at that.
Well, you know what? I was to bring it.
I'm on the
stop
website
forcing
right now.
You, to stop. I was going to say to stop putting you in the awkward position where we're
I
asking
might
you
sell them
probing
at this
questions
point and
about
just sell all these kits and just go.
I was going to say just going back to the Mechanicus question as well. Would you ever? And maybe the answer is no, and you've sort of already answered that. But would you ever, if Dark Mechanicus was a thing, if they made that an army, would you lean into it and have both sides of the Mechanicus?
It's an interesting one. I think for me, I would have to, because I actually see Admech kind of as a bad guy anyway, if that makes sense, because they were horrific. race.
Well, yeah, I was
So-
going to say you regularly run in battle reports, or certainly in the majority of ones I've seen. You tend to run. Is it Anzion's pseudogenitor relic, which is like basically the thing that like dissects somebody. You know, performs a what's the proper
an
word for it?
autopsy, or
while they're alive. What's the
while
word?
they're alive, yeah. So
Oh my
yeah, I
word.
mean they are horrific. You know, they are absolutely horrific. So I think for me, both from a model perspective and from a rules perspective, they'd have to go a different direction. If they were different enough, then yeah, because I love that idea, but it would have to fulfill something that I don't get from current army, if that makes sense.
Maybe
Also,
lots
I'd
of demon
probably
engines?
and I'd probably have to fight Chef for it because he loves Dark Mechanicum, absolutely loves Dark Mechanicum. So that would be something that he would probably go to. However, he's never going to build or paint it himself, so at least I'd have that advantage.
Well, I'll give a little plug at this point to a friend of ours, close friend of Ed's as well. Is AJ, aka Alfred_Farius on YouTube, on Instagram. If you're into the Dark Mechanicus stuff, check him out because he's built a Mechanicus army, which is a Mechanicus, but he's very much leaned into the Grimdark. I mean, there are. I'll let people go and look at it, but there are like parts of like baby dolls in there, like on the.
Oh no, that thing is horrific.
Yeah, it's proper grim, horrific. But if you like that sort of thing, like check it out because it's so cool. What AJ has done.
I swear to God, when he put pictures of that in the WhatsApp group, it made me feel genuinely uncomfortable. Literally, I saw that and I was just like, "What is this? What mind thought this up?" Jesus Christ!
He heard Dune Crawler and thought Crawler.
Literally.
That's what he heard.
Honestly. In fact, Stig, I'm going to send that to you now. Also, having just been on the website, Stig, I am utterly convinced that you're doing Ossiarch Bone Reapers. I am convinced.
No.
The Viking Ossiarch.
Nothing you say will dissuade me from
But
this.
a good friend of mine does play Bone Reapers in AOS, and he tells me about how brilliant they are and what have you. But he's a competitive AOS player, so we all know how aggressive that can be towards play and destroy people. So I will probably let him down by being fluffy.
For a second, I thought you were about to say, "Yeah, I know a guy. His name's Lawrence. He really loves these Ossiarch Bone Reapers."
We don't have that army yet.
Now we're gonna just have a series of Venn diagrams trying to work out what you've got. But on again, just Alex sticking with Abmech. But one of the, so
tell me about your YouTube career.
there has been some sort of, I guess, slightly sadder news, or not, slightly downbeat news today from GW that Sandman kindly alerted Quipster and I to, which is on the community site, which is that they've slowed down the pre-order schedule because of the ongoing disruption. Sandman made a very good point, which is maybe all the stock was stuck on that boat that got stuck in the Suez Canal. So maybe that's part of the reason. But
just full of codexes. Just that was
So they've slowed it down. So the AdMech Codex, which obviously they have sort of done a little bit of preview for, is not going to be with us for a little bit longer. But what we have seen is actually some quite interesting rules changes, I think. So I think the big one that was previewed on Warhammer Community, or the flip side of the same thing, was your laser chickens are going to have assault las cannons, and your Skitarii Rangers galvanic rifles are going to be heavy, which is kind of interesting that a troop choice has a heavy weapon as their standard piece of kit. I mean, what are do you have any thoughts on that? What's your sort of take, and where do you think that kind of indicates things are going?
It's an interesting one, and I think to try and make it so that people don't try and join dots up to things that I genuinely don't know. I think when I first saw that, I think from a Ranger's perspective, again I went back to the first thing I ever read about them, and about the idea that the Rangers are these incredible marksmen that fire these effectively antique weapons that have the most high-tech bullets known to mankind. And so I love the idea of them being, them having something that can actually do some damage. Because anyone that's ever fired a unit of galvanic rifles and done nothing will know how frustrating it is a little bit from a lore perspective, just to be able to go, it's just these guys are supposed to be like these incredible marksmen, and let's realize that they've probably replaced both their eyes with bionics for a reason. Like they're expecting it to be good, and so being able to do some damage is kind of an important thing. And I think whilst there's a meta wise there's a lot of T5 out there and what have you, I think units like Rangers should be able to quite easily put a hurt on other T3 style models out there. They should be able to do that. That's a balanced thing. They should be able to be able to do that. So I think the changes for profiles for those, I like that. I think that looks, now where it goes, and always the thing with all these previews is always that they'll show you an element, but we all know that the rules are not just that line. Yeah, and that's always, particularly with AdMech, a lot of the most interesting things about AdMech are often in the data sheet as opposed to on the stat line. The stat line is basic human that's a bit good at shooting. That's generally what they are. But other than that, that's where the interesting stuff tends to be outside of that. And there does seem to be more of a move from GW to put more things on the sheet rather than on a strat or all those kind of things. So you should have a little bit more there. So I'm interested to see what around this is. So I think that's the interesting thing with this stuff is that like I look at it as being so where does that go from there? What else is going on around that? Unfortunately, this being the way of the world, everyone sees a single thing and then decides that it's the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world because there's no grey area or middle ground for anyone on the internet. But the middle ground, and all the extra bits are where it gets exciting. And I think, similarly for the last chickens, again, the lore-wise of those is that they are marksmen. They are able to pick out a target whilst on the move on a perpetual motion engine. I mean, that's just ridiculously brilliant in 40k anyway, so they should be dangerous, right? It should always be that.
Yeah, I was saying this to Quipster earlier, the perpetual motion machine point about the chickens, which I think is something that gets forgotten. People who don't know the lore of them is like, if they let them go, they just keep going, and they sort of just keep going around the planet until...
And when the servitor that's actually doing the driving dies, they just wipe it out and put another one in, whilst they have to lift it up. They lift up the walker because it's still going. Unplug him and put another one in its place, just maybe wipe the seat down, and then away they go. That's how it is. So, like, again, how horrific and grimdark can you get?
But then making them assault kind of works, right? Because they shouldn't be standing still. They should be moving.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was gonna say with these robot chicken things, that was a thing there. That's a reference. Yeah, literally. But yeah. With these robot chicken things, isn't it even more like super like 40k? Because isn't the reason why they just don't stop, they just keep running, is because the AdMech don't want to turn them off because they don't know how to switch them back on again?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, like literally. So, again, they don't know how this stuff works. They just realise that when the servitor dies, they have to just pick it up so that because it won't stop. They just have to, plug another one in to keep it going. Like, that's all they know. It's just they're replacing batteries, just they don't really understand that that's what's happening.
I quite like, on a similar lore point, I quite like even just the basic Skitarii Ranger, so sort of rad-soaked. And I will say, actually, people are interested in Mechanicus lore. I actually think a lot of the books about the AdMechs, there is a series, there's one called Skitarii, there's one called Tech Priest, and there's a really cool story involving the Dark Mechanicus and a Demon Forge world and all this kind of cool stuff, and the Iron Warriors turn up. I thoroughly recommend them. I cannot remember the author off the top of my head, but if you have a Google, you'll see them in there. And some of the descriptions of the Skitarii in there, these kind of like rad-soaked troopers who just kind of go on, and they're obviously, they're still biological underneath. They're still kind of suffering the effects of the radiation, and that's why, if they take their helmets off, their like teeth are falling out. Like, it looks like some sort of one of those like late 1980s government warning videos about what happens after a nuclear war. To sort of try and to sort of show you how frightening it all
I
is.
thought you were going to say after someone smokes marijuana.
That's a different.
Don't do drugs.
Video.
Just say no.
Put down those drugs, or you will be turned into the mechanical servant of the Omnissiah. No, so but they, and also the fact that, like, if you're an Imperial Guardsman, right, and you turn up to fight this war, and you're like, oh, cool, our allies are showing up, and then the Skitarii turn up, it's like, great, now I'm gonna get radiation poisoning off my friends. I think I'll take the bolter from the Chaos Marine, actually. Like, maybe that'd be a nicer way to go.
Vanguard, it's a rule that no one ever remembers, but if you're within an inch of a Vanguard unit, you're -1 toughness. Just by standing next to them, they are radiating you. And that's, I love that. And with the Vanguard, particularly, the reason they wear the helmets is because they've been using these weapons, which means that they are absolutely on a short time fuse. Of all my Vanguard, anyone of them that have like no gloves on, they have I use like a green wash on their hands, so they've got like a 1950s kind of green tint underneath the skin, just to try and show that they're disappearing. And
isn't that Mr. Burns in The Simpsons? All these years
exactly.
working at a nuclear plant, give me a healthy green glow.
Healthy green glow, exactly that. Yeah, so that's why all my Vanguard have like green hands.
Nice. So I think on the, while we're talking about rules as well, we should obviously talk about the new book, the Charadon Warzone book that has come out, because that obviously a big part of that is the invasion of Metallica. And I sort of have to say it like that because of the
best name ever.
By the Death Guard, Typhus has turned up and has decided to invade a Forge world. And there's a kind of bit of interesting interaction there, because I think people also forget that Nurgle, while he is a god of disease, he does also deal in scrap code and stuff that like infects metal. He's a specialist. He doesn't just go for biological material. So the AdMech are also got to be aware of him. And one of the rules things they've introduced in that is this idea of armies of renown. Which I guess we'll talk about next. And the AdMech one in there, I think, is quite interesting because it sort of goes against everything you've said about how you like to play your army, Stig. So maybe I can tell what you're going to think of it, because it is the Mechanicus Defense cohort. And it seems to me that it really goes well if you like two things, which is standing still and blowing stuff up like Michael Bay. Right, just over the top explosions. So have you had a look at these rules? Have you thought about maybe running them? What are your sort of views on it?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think in general, one of the things with the armies of renown is there was a lot of talk about is it formations coming back? Is it like and of course that was always everyone's afraid because it must be formations coming back and that'll be the end of the world, or specialist detachments as they were shortly called. And I think what's interesting with these is that they've all got some really big restrictions, which definitely kind of has a bit of a balancing point. Are they relatively strong, or is there some strength there? Yes, because hopefully every army in 40k has got some strength if you play it right. I think it's an interesting one because with this Metallica, although it's not locked into Metallica, which is interesting. Metallica is a Forge world that can't even get any love in their own book. I mean, that's quite quite sad. You can't have any Skitarii units, and that is such a balancing factor because for those that aren't aware, that basically means you're not taking Dune Crawlers, you're not taking Dune Riders, you're not taking any of the vehicles, any of my chickens, you're not allowed them, you're not allowed my doggos, you're not allowed my Batmen, you're not allowed any of the good stuff. You can have Electro Priests of both descriptions, you can have Dakka bots, you can have Punchy bots, and you can have Breachers and Destroyers and Servitors if you want something to warp onto an objective at some point. That's it, pretty much. There is very little within any of the AdMech books, because we're now in free books. There's very little in any of them that doesn't have the Skitarii keyword, right? So it is a real limiting factor. You're going to take some real you're going to be able to put out some real punishment, and they are, being the defensive cohort, there's some really interesting things that are both very defensive in terms of being able to take a punch, but there's some stuff that is very much, best defense, best attack, etc. So you could have a relatively devastating turn one if you've got the right line of sight. You shouldn't have the right line of sight, because that's the way that a ninth edition board is built. You shouldn't be able to just be as devastating as some of the stuff is out there is talking about. If you're still playing on an 8th edition board, that's going to be hard. Like, if you go second against that army and you don't have the appropriate terrain, it's going to do some real damage. Equally, some of their defensive abilities, they're going to be really hard to shift if you're playing on said same board. They are going to be very tough. They're going to be sitting in one place, in one building, that they've suddenly given their breaches a 1-up save, and you're going to struggle to remove them. Like, that's going to be a thing. So I think, it does as always, it's always the balancing factors of all these things, right? It's, is your board built the right way? Are you actually going to be able to play the mission? Are you actually going to win the primary? You're going to be hard pressed with the primary on a lot of that, with a lot of that, unless you can do enough damage in turn 1 and 2 to then start, moving your castle up. But you are very much in that castle thing. Doesn't mean to say I won't give it a go at some point, depending on when I can get back in the studio and see if it's relevant. Then I'll probably throw out a list for it, purely to have a play with it and show folks what it can do. But I don't think it's the boogeyman that some people have been talking about. I don't think they've been too bad. I think the Death Guard one is quite interesting as well. If you're unless you're going to take Mortarion, this is a very interesting alternative that can do some real damage, and then he's also very fluffy as well, because it's Typhus and it's lots of Terminators, lots of Poxwalkers. So that's very fluffy too, which is nice.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the things that I really like about this, what this tells me, is that it's kind of similar to how you were saying earlier, Stig, about how some people build like they lost some weight and some people like they lost another way. I think we often all forget that actually castling is a very legitimate style of playing the game. And some people do just want to paint their models, set them up on a table, and try and blow the fuck out of things. That's how they like to play the game, and that's like more power to them, in my opinion. And what this is really great.
As an Imperial Fist player, I feel attacked.
And the reason I think this is great is because now I feel like if you're an AdMech player, I don't think the AdMech book will be built around this, at the same kind of idea, but now you have that option if you want to do that, and that's awesome. And the other thing I just thought I would say, which was that I think it was JT, when we had him on from Play On, he was saying about AdMech,
name drop,
and he was saying how the thing is about AdMech, as you were saying, Stig, is they have been, everybody's thought they were the boogeyman every edition they've come out. People all because they've got good firepower. Everybody always freaks out immediately, so that'll be exciting.
Yeah, and we said it at the start with you talking about the Drakari. That book allows you to play in many different ways. There's lots of people out there talking about the different best Drakari list. There's no best Drakari list. There's a good player with one of the many various ways of playing it, and it will do really, really well because that player's really good. That's how that works. That's my dream for every book, right? That you can play different ways, and it's down to you being a good player. You have to be a good player to do well with with it, and I think that's the thing that it should be. You can go as far one way or the other as you want, and it can go with that. I think that's how it should be, really.
Well, I think like one of the just on the Drakari thing, and sorry to go on to yet another army, but like one of the things that is a really good signaler from that book for me is like, when was the last time you heard anybody build an army focused around leadership? Focused around doing debuff to leadership. You can do that in the Drakari Codex. You can with the one of the covens, the Dark Creed, and with the basically the crap that you can tack on to like raiders and venoms and various other things. You can get people who are on like -3, -4 leadership, and then they're taking mortal wounds. They're fighting last because of the other mechanics in the army. if the AdMech and all the other codexes, you know, as you say, get something like that where they can lead in. I mean, again, wild speculation here, but like Night Lords, like if they, you know, in the Chaos Codex, if they can lean into leadership, that would be so cool. So I really, it's a shame the AdMech Codex is going to be a bit delayed because, you know, having come off this high of the Drakari Codex, and they've all been good so far. Don't get me wrong, I love the Death Guard Codex as well. But coming off the high of the Drakari, it'll be really interesting to see where they go next with the AdMech. And I think you're right. Like, you know, what the Sandman say, everybody is going to panic, right? Everybody immediately is going to be like, this is OP, and you know there will be things in.
They have
there
a strength 10 gun. I'm out. This is.
But it is you know, it is about balance, and on this this defense cohort, like one of the things I think about it is it is that duality. It's a bit weird because if you look at the rules, it sort of benefits from standing still, and everyone keeps talking about it like it is a castle, which it is going to be primarily. But the warlord trait you get for it gives you double obsec within 6 inches, which kind of indicates you want to be slowly moving up with your, you know, your Castellans and your Cataphrons and stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point. You know, with Dakabots, they're you know, they are an interesting one where they at the moment in 9th edition you've got the decision between, do I lock them down and double this amount of shots, and then I'm here and that's it, or do I keep going because I'm a toughness 6 model with 6 wounds and a great save at that point because my, you know, I get a 4-up invuln and I get a 2-up armor at that point, and as soon as I stand still I'm down to a 5-up and I'm down to a 3-up, and yes, I can do some work but I'm not going anywhere. And so it's interesting, and I think the other thing is that whereas you've got also your you know, because we're playing in an edition where the primary mission is take and hold an objective and stay there, you've got to remove that unit and be able to exist there yourself.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's all well and good shooting something, but if you've got nothing to be in its place, you're not getting those points either. And so, you know, so there's a mixture, and that's where breaches become interesting because they have some duality with the right additional warlord trait using, so that you can, you know, prime Hermeticon, allowing you to re-roll your failed war hits because it's an old book, so you've got weird wording. But you know, that can be, you know, pretty good, and you can take Power Fist equivalents on those if you want them to. So you know, that all that sort of stuff, you know, works. And then, you know, as you say, because, you know, talk about this cohort and the idea of, you know, moving forward. Well, you've also got squishy things if you want them to. It's just your squishy things now have a snail back and they've got lots of fire coming out their hands. So, you know, that's there are other options that can go out and do some harm as well. You know, it's interesting to think, well, you know, then you're making someone choose. Do I fire at the thing that's causing me the pain, or do I let those 20 guys with snailbacks go and stand on that objective? Yeah, which one am I going to want to do? Like, yes, they're squishy, but like, you know, how much firepower do I have when I need to put everything into removing those other guys that are causing me lots of pain right now?
But you're also forgetting, Stig, that, you know, if you're running the Electro Priests with the, you know, the snail packs, because they didn't get seen very often in the AdMech meta, right? You get to run them up the table, and then when someone goes, what are they going to do? And you start rolling, you just channel the Emperor from Star Wars, be like, unlimited power!
Which is their most important rule.
Exactly.
You know, being able to meme yourself out of into any victory. Yeah, they're actually pretty... You know, they're a surprisingly good unit, which a lot of people like don't realize like how good they are. You know, in the last book, gosh, my brain's Engine War. You've got a great strat to make them AP2. You know, so like with that many shots, AP2, yeah, that's, you know, and bear in mind they're exploding hits as well. So
yes.
they are a bucket. You know, you're making Orc players jealous of the amount of dice you're rolling with a unit of 15 or 20 of those.
Spicy jazz hands.
Yeah, you know, when lockdown wasn't, you know, quite so much in the States, a guy called Damien Owens, who I know pretty well, was running 15 in a GT winning list, which was 1 million breaches, and then a 15 unit of these that he would reinforcement points, and then just walk on and just remove anything he pointed at, because they've got so many shots. And oh, by the way, you've still got 25 breaches hanging around in all, that are now covering over every objective because they've just allowed to walk up because you were worried about other things. So there's always a combo on all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to see where it goes.
So one thing I was going to interject with is that I am sort of famous on this podcast for interjecting into wild tangents that are just not part of the previous conversation whatsoever. So I'm doing one of those right now. I make no apologies. This is just who I am. And this is something I've been kind of wondering about for a while. And Ed, you were going to ask this later, but I'm doing it now for you.
Fair enough.
This might be a very personal question, so you don't have to answer if you don't want to, Stig. But I've always been interested. The tattoos on your arm, do they signify something, or do you just do them because they look badass and cool, which they do?
Thank you. They don't signify anything. Apparently, if in Japan, I could be in a really bad place because of what they mean.
Oh, yeah.
But they don't necessarily signify anything. I have a bass clef at the top of my arm, which is generally never seen, because in another world, I was a drummer by trade, as a first career out of college. Until I got injured, and so had to get a real job, and then somehow I found myself playing with toy soldiers. Anyway, so I had that first, and then I was in was doing, designing lots of different ideas of what else I might want, because no one ever has one tattoo. They are entirely addictive. That's never a think you're going to get one. And as I was designing the various different things, as is often the way with my brain, I became more interested in actually these patterns that I was doing, on various different things, and just became how do I simplify that further? How can that be more precise? So they're all exactly the same distance apart with exactly the same thickness and exactly the same spacing up my arm. So they literally have a kind of, they are just about precision to a certain way. They order in the chaos of my mind. So yeah, but they're not. It's exactly, just like some form of logic somehow, despite the fact that they're not.
So like the antithesis of the AdMech then.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent, I love it. Thank you so much for answering that. Oh, my wild tangent that had nothing to do with anything.
That was a proper right turn. That was.
I know, right? I'm so good at these.
Cool. Yeah, I know. I was going to say. So, I think given time, I think I will hand over to Ed, who has a question about the something along the lines of the AdMech defense cohort, shall we say? So I will hand over to Ed here.
Oh, sure. Wow. So yeah, I thought it'd be a fun thing to talk about quickly, because we're all different, semi well read, I should say, most of us, and I think we all have ideas of the kind of fluffy special detachments or armies of renown, as they are now known, that we would love to see. And I just wondered what everybody's if they could create an army of renown, what would you do? And I think the really fun thing, as you mentioned, Stig, is how there's proper restrictions. So for me, I'm going to go with a very easy one, but the one probably closest to my heart, which is the Fallen. So the really fun thing about this is if they ever do Fallen as armies of renown, the restriction is, you don't get access to most of the things in the Chaos Space Marine book. You get access to very few units, but then you probably get some very powerful ability. You get your Terminators get something similar to the Dark Angels. You can break Cypher's rule in terms of being your warlord. You get the Imperium keyword. There could be a whole bunch. I think the Fallen would be a perfect army of renown, because you can't just. It'd be tough to just make a Fallen army, isn't just put them as an extra legion in the book. Because then they have fallen demon engines, which they don't have. There's actually fluff-wise, there's only one fallen demon prince, so you could have that kind of restriction also, and then he could only take one specific loadout. I would do very niche things to match what the fallen actually have.
But they should also they've been around for 10,000 years, right? So if they're true fallen, then they've been around, so they've actually existed. They are true veterans of the Long War. So there's some tie in there, right? They could be very good, but as you say, you've only got troops pretty much, and havoc equivalents, maybe stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, and so some of them will be really new, right? Because some of the Fallen were made on Caliban to kind of reinforce the Dark Angels. They're very recent, and then they could have been dispersed through time. And Azra has I think done the maths at this point to figure out that most of them have come out of real space, but some of them could have lived 20 years on Earth, become an Astartes, had the rebellion, and got sent forward through time. Maybe they're 30. It's going to be all over the place. But yeah, I would love to. So what does everyone else want to do? Crips, let's start with you. If you could do an army of renown, where would you go?
Okay, so firstly, let me make sure I understand what an army of renown is, because I've not actually read that much about this. So it's essentially just an extra Forge world or an extra Legion, or
it has. Yes, so essentially, it's a very fluffy detachment that you want to take, and I think as Stig mentioned, the Mechanicus cohort has a very big restriction, as does the Terminus S, Typhus's flagship. They have very big restrictions of things you can't take. So what would you do? What restriction? So say it was the Shadowkeepers. So for example, you could say, we're doing the Shadowkeepers, but then they can't take. I don't know what Shadowkeepers can't take, but Dreadnoughts, let's say, right? Do you see what I mean? So what would you do?
This is the thing with Custodes. It's very difficult to give them limitations because there's not much in the Codex. Let's just
factor.
You don't get.
Yeah, literally, it's just let's take out 3 data sheets. Oh, that's off the Codex. Shit. Okay. So my mind first immediately goes to Shadowkeepers, like you said, but I sort of expanding from that. I would like to see, just from a lore perspective, because they do this armies of renown thing. They obviously will delve into a lot more of the lore. I want to see what the shield companies look like. That because you know how the Gene Seed and all the Primaris tech was sent to every chapter. I would love to see what the shield company that goes along with that looks like. What's the lore behind that? What's the makeup of it? Is it one shield company? Is it just 5 custodians? Did they take, how many Sisters of Silence did they take with them? I would love to see that. Or I would love to see a straight up Sisters of Silence army of renown.
That would be cool.
With full strats, with support, with more models. You said limiting, and I've literally gone the opposite direction of that.
They're already very
I want
limited.
more things. Yeah, I think Sisters of Science are limited enough. But I would like to see them. I would like to see you be able to do more things thematically with them. And it's literally, for me, more of a lore thing than a tabletop thing. Because I would like to see what the structure of, for example, the Sisters of Silence as an organization is. Who are their leaders? How is it structured? When they discover a new, lost fortress monastery that has more Sisters of Science in it, how are they integrated? That kind of thing. And cool. So, just from a lore perspective, I'd like to see that explored a lot more.
Sweet. Adam, what about you, man? Where, of your many armies, who would you want?
Yeah. I'm kind of torn on this. So I think there's 2 that'd be quite cool. So I think for the Sisters, I'd quite like to see, so Sisters of Battle, I'd quite like to see something expanded on the the organisation run as it is run by the Ecclesiarchy. So I'd like to see something a lot, using a penitent crusade almost, that has a lot of almost like cultist type models, right, as your troops, and almost your sisters as an elite force as part of that. And maybe something focusing on the use of the penitent engines and that kind of thing to really build out that penitent sort of the crazy ecclesiarchy nonsense which would go along with that. And I must say, I think one of the things I think is really cool about going back to the Admech. The Admech are really cool because they're very 40k. They're very grimdark. They're the kind of mechanical, biological interface, horrific. Everything that you've talked about tonight, Stig. I think the Sisters are like the most almost grimdark gothic 40k faction, because they really lean into that, like, just this universe of being in the future, but it's just this mad religious zealots knocking about with like fire on their head and stuff like that. So I'd love to see an army of renown based around exactly, Flamehead. I know Beard is using him as a chaos cultist. He's not a chaos cultist. He loves the Emperor, and that's the reality of it, right? I've seen those new Cawdor models. He is actually one of them, and Beard is gonna have to admit it one of these days. But yeah, aside from that, the other one I'd like to see is something for like the you could do it as Drukhari, you could do it as regular craft worlds, but like some of the piracy aspects they have, they're Corsairs. So there's a really there's like a proper cool. Wacky Drukhari character called Duke Sliskus. Who was a named character, and he had a model, I think, way back in like third edition, and they've got rid of him in sort of successive codexes. But he was like, I heard a description. Somebody described him actually on another podcast the other day. I thought it was one of the best descriptions I've ever heard of him. They said he's like David Bowie as a pirate in space, because he was this like absolute nutter, right? He never wore the same clothes twice. He was like really over the top. He's also got some really cool lore, which is that he's the only person to have ever outwitted Lucas the Trickster, the Space Wolves.
Yes, I knew that's where I knew the name from.
He cut out he outwitted him to the point he cut out one of Lucas the Trickster's hearts, kept it as like a prize, and then just pushed him out into space and left him floating there for the Space Wolves to find.
So, I've actually read that novel. It's not really a spoiler because that's part of his story, but that happens in the Lucas the Trickster novel. And firstly, that novel is hilarious, and everyone should read it because it's amazing. Because there's a scene where Lucas the Trickster thinks it'd be funny to funnel all the shit from the entire Fang into the chambers of one of the Space Wolf captains, and he's just standing there, just covered in shit. Like, who did this? Why? Why has this happened? I love that so much. But the way that Duke Sliskus is described in that book is so amazing and funny, because a lot happens in the book, and he lands on this world. I don't think he fully realizes it's Fenris, and I don't think he knows that the Space Wolves are there. And so when he like encounters Lucas, he's like, all of this crazy stuff happens, and he's like looking at it like his men dying. He's like, I have to know who did this. This is crazy. Like, almost really enjoying it. Like, yeah, read that book. Sorry, that was my tangent.
No, that's all right. I was going to say, but my army of renown would be something based on the kind of the Corsair principle of the Drukhari or the Eldar. Cool. So I don't know how you would lean into that. Maybe you can take, like, you can't take Venoms, you can only take Raiders or something like that, and that you get bonuses for firing out of the Raiders and things like that. I don't know how you would do it, but I just think that would be really fun.
I know exactly how you do that. It involves some green stuff, and you just give everyone in the army a green stuff eye patch. Done.
Nice.
Sorted. Simple as
the
that.
restriction is -1 inch on their like range of weapons for line of sight. And Stig, what about you then? So it doesn't have to be Admech or Custodes. If there's any kind of faction in the books you would love to be like, I want this specifically in the game.
I think. Well, I'm going to be cheeky and give you two answers. One I'm going to do quickly because I've talked about it. Chef and I talked about it on a show once. Love the idea of a cavalry. We've talked about it already. Here the idea of a cavalry force. So you're only allowed to take that you're only allowed to take chickens and doggos and that type of stuff. That is it. And you could make it so that again maybe you end up with a way to essentially make a marshal be riding one of the doggos or something like those lines to be able to
Sick.
do that. You could almost maybe do the old independent character kind of idea where he kind of joins the a particular squad, and that sort of stuff would be really, really cool. But the other one that I would love to see, and again, I don't have to come up with the writing, so therefore I don't have to worry about how difficult it would be. But I love the idea of, I love Inquisitors. We talked about it. I love the idea of if they were able to do a proper inquisitorial army. So maybe
yeah.
that's where you've got massive restrictions but you can take things from different factions. You would have to balance this so hard to make it not just playing soup, but the ability to be able to take elements from guard. Maybe that's your inquisitorial troops are effectively guardsmen, without orders, or something like that. And a bunch of different things that you can because from a hobbyist perspective, I love the idea of being able to build that army. That's one. The biggest restriction was you're not allowed to play it unless your whole army looks like an army. So it can't just look like you've borrowed models from your mates to make that super army. It has to be, so there's a hobby restriction on it. But I love the idea of that kind of thing. An Inquisitor at the end of the day has pretty much the most power outside of Trajan. You'd probably argue within the 40k world.
Gets a bit much at times.
So they can do pretty much anything. So why couldn't they just decide this is my army now, and you're coming with me and you're coming with me, and this is now just happening.
Well, how I mean, how big is Eisenhorn's? Like, I actually read. Crips made fun of me the other day for not reading Eisenhorn. I read both of the first 2 books this week.
I was going to say, so you just corrected that very quickly because they're brilliant.
Excellent.
Yeah, but he's just how big's his host? He's got so many staff, hasn't he? Like,
totally. And there's loads of conversation. Ravenor's a similar one where it's a whole. Again, I'd love the idea to be able to do. Acolytes are not. The rules for acolytes are not good enough for creating that kind of cohort. That kind of group of folks around an Inquisitor in that same way. So
specialists,
maybe princeps or something.
Again, it'd be cool to be able to do this, but again, I think fitting the armies of renown mechanic means you've got to take stuff that's already existing. So that's why you've kind of got to balance it a little bit by turning off probably more of it. And let me be clear, I don't want this army to be game winning. I don't want this to be like the next I want it to be really hard but really cool and really fun, and that would be something that I'd get behind in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think it's kind of surprising that Inquisitors don't have that support. In a way, how they've done Inquisitors does make a lot of sense. That's just one guy that you put into an army. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, Inquisitors are such a popular faction to not have a book. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the other thing is, again, it goes back to that thing that they're a very unique thing in the IP.
True.
Inquisitors in all their different forms. For one thing, it is all their different forms. There is no single way that one of those exists, which is awesome. Yeah. Right. But that you can't really go, well, that's in that, and that's in that movie, and that was from that book, and there's lots of things within the sci-fi or science fantasy, however you want to look at it, that you can go, well, that's kind of over there, and that's kind of over there, and this is kind of a spin off that. They are really pretty grimdark and really pretty unique to GW's IP. So again, it'd be one of those things that I'd love to see them go further with it. Why they've not done it, who knows? There could be so many different reasons, but the balancing of it may just be it's too hard.
Craziness. I mean, this is a super quick, wild tangent that I'm about to take us down. Of course. Stig, I just sent you a message on Instagram, and it was earlier on. We were talking about Alfred Farius and his nightmare fuel conversion, and I just want to see your reaction when you look at that picture that I've sent you.
Oh wow! Yeah,
there we go. There we go.
I'm glad you said something there, Stig, because I was about to say with all the best will in the world, Quipster, this, although we have video, this is not a visual medium. So if Stig had just looked shocked, then all the listeners would have heard is just a bit of silence.
Yeah, a little bit of silence and a sound of someone vomiting. I mean, it's pretty out there, isn't it?
Oh my god.
Obviously,
can you see?
Of course, if I did that, then I get told I'm modelling for advantage because now you can see over walls. It's a little bit taller. For those that haven't seen the picture we're talking about, the models, quite far up in the air on what are only be described as baby's limbs. So,
baby
yeah,
legs.
Legs.
Yeah.
One way.
So can you see why I'm like so unsettled when I look at that picture?
It starts. You start to question your friends and your friendship, and you think, am I really close with this person? Do I want to spend time with them anymore? I don't know. But fair play to it. Commitment, 100%.
Is that why you rebased your admech? Sorry, out of curiosity, for modeling for advantage.
It's the same basis. They're literally the same.
Were they on Cork before?
Yeah, they're still on Cork.
They're still okay.
Yeah, so the basing, largely was because snow doesn't show up very well on camera. It has a real habit of blowing out and just like looking like a white blob. So it didn't always look that great. Also, anyone that's got a snow-based army will know that when you're playing on a desert mat, you kind of
doesn't make any sense.
lose a little bit of the kind of connection to what's going on.
And anything is possible through the Omnissian, Stig.
Of course, 100%. So yeah, I chose to kind of rebase. Rightly or wrongly, I kind of like them now. So yeah. But it rebasing that many points of an army is not something I want to repeat. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think I was going to say. So we have a bit of a thing on this podcast that we tend to get pretty much bang on 2 hours with our lovely guests like yourself who've come and taken the time to talk to us, and we've gone through a lot tonight, and I think this is probably a good point for us to wrap up. So I will say thank you so much for joining us, Stig. It has been wonderful, and learning about your sort of history and your thoughts on Admech and Custodes is certainly, I've loved it. I'm sure the listeners will as well. And I will say on behalf of all of us, and I would hope on behalf of all of our listeners, I'm sure it is, we cannot wait to see you get back in the studio, get whatever ridiculous new jank the Admech get in their codex, find the toughest list you can, go and school the Spider, because I'm sure he's feeling pretty good about himself at the moment with the Drakari, and really become the new master of the meta over at Tabletop Tactics.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great fun. I really enjoyed it.
Good stuff. So I think then on that basis, it just leaves it for me to say I have been ADR Wargaming, and I will say goodbye. Quipster, say goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone. It has been a fantastic podcast, which I have delighted in taking in random directions at my own whim.
And the Sandman.
Yeah. Bye, everybody. As Adam said at the start, we all believe we have important things to say, and you need to hear them. And now you've heard more of the things I believe, and you're all better for it. So well done. Well done, you.
And if you'd like to see more, we are available obviously on hear more. We're available on all of your favourite platforms. We do have a YouTube channel, the Conclave 40k podcast. We are a little bit behind on episodes. I will remedy that and I will upload all the latest stuff. And we are also on Instagram at the Conclave 40k. So check us out on there. But it just leaves me to say thank you very much again, Stig, for joining us. And thank you to everyone for listening. See you later, guys. Bye.
Love you, bye.